Welcome to Futures Hub, the podcast that ignites curiosity and navigates the pathways to tomorrow. I'm Mia, your guide on this journey into the future, where we explore the art of foresight, community co-creation, and personal growth. In each episode, we dive deep into innovative techniques to unlock the potential to shape our individual capacities and contribute to vibrant, inclusive communities. Join us as we mine the rich landscape of foresight, community empowerment, and building bridges between diverse voices. Whether you're a seasoned futurist or just dipping your toes into the world of foresight, this is the space where we craft a future that's both dynamic and inclusive. Let's embark on this journey together. Welcome to Futures Hub. Welcome to the Futures Hub podcast, where we delve into the power of foresight, co-creation, and community engagement to shape better futures. I'm Mia, and today we're joined by Jessica Thornton. Jessica Thornton is co-president of Creative Futurist and is a futurist, strategist, and designer with extensive experience in the public and nonprofit sector. She works across a variety of diverse subject areas, exploring the futures of cities, work, health, leadership, food systems, arts, and public policy. Jessica has a Master's of Design in Strategic Foresight from OCAD University and lives in Hamilton, Ontario with her wife, daughter, and 2 polydactyl kittens. And if you're like me and are not entirely sure what a polydactyl kitten is, it means that they have more than the normal number of fingers or toes. In this episode, Jessica shares her journey from reimagining program design to founding Creative Futures during the pandemic. We'll unpack the tools and strategies she uses in Creative Futures to help organizations take a pause, think in plurals, and embrace bold, transformative possibilities. Whether you're looking for practical foresight tools or fresh inspiration for tackling today's challenges, this conversation has something for everyone. Let's get started. Thank you, Jessica, for joining us on the podcast today. I'm so excited to have you here and to hear your insights and just have this conversation together.
Thank you so much for inviting me to chat with you. Excited to dive into this.
The first question that I have for you is if you can share a bit about yourself and your journey into the world of foresight and futures work.
I started my career off as a fundraiser, working in the not-for-profit sector, and was very passionate about systems change organizations who are really thinking about the broader, whether it's the food system or urban system, how to really affect change. And what I saw time and time again was this complete mismatch between these visions of how to really move systems to be better for people and funding challenges. So we would have amazing funders come in and say, yes, we believe in this, we love this, here's 3 years of funding. And then at the end of 3 years, they say, wait, why isn't the system changed completely yet? How can you tell us that? And it was really this ongoing challenge of getting them to understand how change happens and where you can see incremental change and really what it takes in terms of generational change to move systems and that systems transformation piece. And so my obsession with that led me to OCAD's Masters of Design and Strategic Foresight and Innovation, where I really went in to say, I want to get better at telling that story of how we can understand and plan for lots of different possible futures and get people to better understand, especially from a funding perspective, how we have to see those interconnectedness and get out of this short-termism approach to funding. So I went in with that plan and came out thinking much more broadly about the work I did and ended up leaving fundraising to work more in research and program design and helping organizations really think about how they could design programs that were imagining where the world was going, but also really harnessing some of the key changes, whether it was around technology or social changes to really adapt. And so that's kind of where I went and then ended up really diving into strategic foresight more deeply and starting to work with a variety of different organizations, largely in the government space, to help them really think about how different programs or policies might need to evolve. And somewhere in there, I was working at a national nonprofit, doing some of this work with them, helping some of their partners think about it. And the pandemic happened. And it was just this moment of all these organizations still needing to make decisions, still needing to move ahead, but absolutely nobody knew what tomorrow brought. And people were really nervous about making funding commitments, about what else they should be paying attention to. If this much can change so fast, what else could change so fast? And that is really from where Creative Futures was born, to understand how can we work with organizations to create more clarity, to help them feel like they can still make decisions, still move forward, even in the face of tremendous high rate of change and in a volatile environment. So that's really how I got where I am today.
That's wonderful. And I feel there's so many different points in your journey that really resonate with me personally. I feel a lot of people, when they find a calling, for example, it's very much brought on by that sense of passion or urgency that you were describing, initially feeling around systems change that really called you to seek more. And it sounds like there were a few different pivoting moments in your journey. So, for example, that focus on programming and program development, and then that look at funding, and then that whole uncertainty of COVID. Sometimes when you're through that journey, I feel that that calling can sometimes feel like a slog. It can feel like you're coming up against walls, or you see cracks in the system and you're not sure how to address them. Have you had those moments of aha, of I see change, I feel that this calling is the right route to go on? Is there anything along your journey that helped guide you that way? Because it sounds like there were a few different pivot points as you went through.
Yeah, absolutely. There was definitely several moments along my career trajectory where it just felt in my gut, this isn't going to go where I want or where it needs to go. So maybe I need to think about something else. And I think that I often then landed in something that felt like it had that movement and possibility, and then kind of got maybe in that position again, just because of the way things work. I think since working at Creative Futures, where we work with a variety of not for profit and public sector organizations, what's so lovely is that I do get to work with so many different groups and leaders and individuals, and it feels like I don't get that feeling anymore, because you might have another project. There's something about saying, hey, this is what I can help you with, and then people come to you, that it feels like the right place to be, and it feels like we can add value doing what we're doing in a way that ebbed and flowed in different organizations.
When did you decide to make that leap? When did that leap happen for you? Was it organic, or was it just, we're doing this, let's jump 2 feet in kind of thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. Before the pandemic, me and my co-founder, Heather Russick, had been dreaming about a variety of different other things we could do. I mean, we both were relatively happy in our jobs at that point, but I had a side hustles going on. I was sort of working full time at a not for profit, but doing different pieces of work for different organizations. And I loved that. I also had a newborn at that stage. I guess my daughter would have been 4 or 5 months. So I was starting to think about, how do I want to spend my time? And so we had all these different ideas of things that we might do. But at the time, I remember thinking, oh, I don't want to go out on my own. I have benefits. I have Heather had a pension. She was at TMU at the time. And so it was a challenging moment. And then through the pandemic, it just really felt like if we were going to do it, this was a really great moment. There was a lot of need, but also I wanted to rebalance where my priorities were. I wanted more flexibility to spend more time with my daughter. I wanted to be available to more organizations. I think once the pandemic happened, it became challenging to navigate the freelance work I was doing as well, just because of all the things. And I wanted to do more of the freelance and maybe less of the full time commitment that I was doing. I was also in a role that had gone from being very future oriented, that when the pandemic happened, there was a bunch of organizational changes, some tightening, as with everywhere. And there was a push for me to focus more on the current program delivery. And once I had gone thinking 5 to 10 years out, it was just a really hard place for me to go when I was like, oh, but we need to think about these things. It's like, no, just deliver, Jess. And yeah, I needed to pivot.
So a little bit of serendipity and a little bit of bravery. It looks like a combination of both. A lot of bravery.
Definitely bravery. There's definitely a moment I remember where I'd been working so much and I was just like, this has to happen. It's time. And at the time, Heather wasn't ready. And I'm like, well, I'm going to start. And then I just slowly pulled her in. I was like, oh, what do you think about this logo? What do you think about this organization? Oh, this organization wants to work with maybe us. What do you think? And then, yeah, she came too. So it's great.
It's really exciting as well, this idea that you're focusing on the need in the sector and that you are able to respond to that need. Part of this podcast is targeted towards, of course, people who are working actively in foresight right now or are aware of it, but also beginners who are just getting their feet wet, whether they're individuals that are curious or organizations that have heard of foresight but are not entirely sure what that means. In your work, do you largely work with clients who say, we want to do futures work? We need foresight. Let's reach creative futures. Or do you often bump into companies that are just like, we don't know what we don't know, and can you let us know? And how do you navigate that?
We feel really lucky when we have people come to us and say, we learned about strategic foresight. We think that it will help us solve this problem we have. Can you help us with this? We love when that happens, when people have already had their minds open to it. And I would say that that's maybe 50% of the time. And then the other 50% of the time, it's really people who have come through our network. They heard we helped someone with research or help someone with a strategic plan. And they're also starting to think about that. It's never about planning for the futures per se and using foresight, but they'll talk to us about how they're trying to make decisions, but there's so much that they are contending with, and there's so many constraints and challenges and uncertainty. And so they're already thinking about strategic foresight in many ways. They just don't have the language yet. So we really work with them to bring that in and help them understand that they can make plans with confidence using this methodology.
And that leads into the question of how to embed this work into public and not for profit organizations. You had spoken earlier about your experience, especially through the pandemic, when things are tight or when there are emergent issues, and the tendency is to focus on that delivery. So, how would you propose navigating and balancing that need to deliver versus the opportunity to embed futures work in an organization?
I think people feel concerned that they're being reactive. I think people are living that, and that's something that they carry. And I think so much of what we do is help them understand that they still need to respond to critical needs today, of which there are so many, but they also need to take a moment, take a pause, and really understand what are those needs going to look like? How are they going to evolve in the next 10 to 20 years? And so, really taking a moment to really assess and reflect on how much of what today we're feeling and reacting to feels like the most important thing to respond to versus how much of that might evolve and is not actually the right thing to focus on. And I think a lot of what we do is work with leaders to really help build their capacity to understand that mix. And that if you are paying too much attention to what right in front of your eyes, right in front of your face, you get completely distracted from everything else going around you. And that's what you should be most scared of at the end of the day. It's not the thing that you're preoccupied, it's those things that's happening behind you or 3 feet over there that you just can't see yet. And so we really help work with leaders to understand how they can think in plural. They might have their own assumptions and guesses about what they think is going to happen, but how do they expand that to really ask and question what if, and talk to their teams, talk to their stakeholders, talk to their users to better understand how they're thinking about it too and how their lives are changing, and to really be curious and to become future curious. And I think there's some really great work that's been put out there in the last few years about how thinking like a futurist is one of the most critical skills the leaders can have over the next 5 to 10 years. We all need to know how to do this. This isn't just something for having a futurist come in. It's actually, we all need to be futurists, and we all are futurists in many ways. We might just not have the language around it. So a lot of our work is helping people build some structure around that, but also really start to understand that people are already thinking about this. They're already thinking about where things could go. They're already worrying. They're already staying up at night, concerned about what if, then that. And oh my goodness, nope, can't think about it. So we just create little moments where they can. It really varies depending on the organization. But we have found this tool of scan clubs where you basically create space that's half an hour to an hour lunchtime where people can come and talk about changes and what it might mean for the world and their work without connecting it to their immediate work plans and responsibilities. So it's not like, I can't say that because then I'm going to have to change these 3 plans that I'm working on. And oh my goodness, creating that safe space just to explore means that it starts to grow and it starts to snowball. And then those ideas do start trickling into other conversations that they weren't before. So just looking for almost informal, playful, fun ways to incorporate it before making it part of people's mandate.
And just a quick question, Open Scan, can anyone join?
Anyone can join.
Wonderful. So it's open, the invite's open, and you don't have to belong to a certain sector or be involved in a certain line of work. You could hop on.
Absolutely. Yep. We say it's for municipal innovators, but we're happy for anyone who's just curious about the topics, honestly. And it's a pretty great audience from coast to coast that join us.
If you have someone coming to you saying, okay, I'm ready, I want to be a futurist, I want to think like a futurist, I want to act like a futurist, what would that look like? What would your advice be to them? And I think the Scan Club is, of course, a wonderful example of how to incorporate that futures thinking. But do you have any other tips or tricks for someone who's like, yes, I'm ready, I'm working the front line, but I also want to be a futurist, or I have this company, but I also want to be a futurist? What would your advice be for those individuals?
So the first thing we typically recommend to folks is to start taking a bit of a pause when they're consuming new information and to think about the what if. If this change were to happen, what are the longer term implications? And then what could happen after that? And just to start to train your brain to not just say, oh, this just happened. Okay, moving on. Like this just happened and this could impact my work or my community in this way. And then if that happened, then what? And then if that happened, then what? And just starting to build that muscle of thinking in plural and thinking about second and third order implications is one of the first things that we recommend. So many people are every day reading new interesting things. We encourage people to look in places they might not be looking traditionally, but also to think about other sources of information, such as art, art forms, or conversations that you overhear or hear people having either on social media or in person. I love sometimes on public transit overhearing that conversation about someone talking about this thing that just happened. And it's like, oh, interesting. People are thinking about this. Let's learn a little bit more. So just being curious about different pieces and considering what it might mean. And I think the first thing we usually get from that is, well, that's really overwhelming. Haven't you read? Millennials, for example, are reading news less than ever before because it's just too depressing. There's too much going on. And while that is absolutely true, and I have days where I can't also read the news as one does, it's really about building constraints and practice around it and saying, I'm going to do this and I'm going to think about this and I'm going to think about what it could mean. And then I need to move on and do the other things I need to do. So, not making it our full focus, but creating a little bit of a routine around it that sort of normalizes it into workflows without making it the full focus, unless you need, of course, to make it the full focus.
Hey, Futures Hub listeners, I hope you're enjoying this episode so far. Before we dive further into the conversation, we wanted to take a moment to pause and to explain some of the powerful foresight tools that Jessica has referenced so far or will be referencing shortly. These methods help organizations and individuals think strategically about the future and make decisions with greater clarity. Let's break them down briefly. The 3 Horizons method is a framework that helps organizations map out the present, near-term, and long-term futures. The first horizon in this framework represents the current state and is often focused on maintaining business as usual. The second horizon identifies innovations or transitions needed to bridge the gap, while the third horizon imagines the aspirational, transformative future we want to achieve. This tool is great for understanding what needs to change and when. The Futures Wheel tool is a brainstorming tool used to explore the ripple effects of a change or decision. Using this tool, you can start with a central idea and then use it to map out what is considered first order, then second order impacts, and so on and so forth. It's all about understanding the cascading implications of actions. Horizon scanning is the process of systematically identifying signals of change, that is, trends, emerging technologies, or societal shifts, for example. By categorizing and analyzing signals, organizations can then spot opportunities and threats early on, helping them to proactively adapt to what's happening. Scenario development is about crafting stories or models of possible futures. Jessica mentions using archetypal scenarios, which highlight extremely contrasting future worlds, and inductive approaches, where scenarios are built from specific trends or drivers. Scenarios help people imagine what different futures could look like and what actions are needed to prepare. The Manoa method, developed at the University of Hawaii, focuses on crafting diverse and plausible future scenarios by identifying critical uncertainties. This is particularly effective for surfacing unexpected possibilities and challenging assumptions. Embodied and experiential futures are approaches that people take beyond intellectual exercises to immerse themselves in future scenarios, either through role play, performances, or tactile experiences. By engaging emotions and senses, these methods can make futures feel real and spark deeper reflection and action as a result. Artifacts from the future is something that we spoke quite a bit about in season 1, and these are tangible objects created to represent a potential future. These could be products, tools, or even documents. When people can see and touch elements of a possible world, it bridges the gap between abstract ideas and lived realities. Artifacts from the future is almost like a subtype or a type of embodied and experiential future. Personas are fictional profiles that represent individuals living in a specific future scenario. They help ground abstract futures in human experience, showing how changes might affect real lives. It's a compelling way to make futures work more relatable and therefore more actionable. As you can see, these tools aren't just about forecasting trends, for example. They're about creating pathways for transformation. These various future tools help us pause, imagine, and explore what's possible in structured ways. I hope this gives you some context for the strategies, methodologies, and tools that Jessica and I are discussing in this episode. If you have any questions, or if you'd like any more information, I invite you to visit the show notes at futureshub.ca to learn more. Now, let's dive back into the conversation to learn more about how these tools can come to life in the work of creative futures. I've been geeking out recently with the Futures Wheel tool, which your comment sparked for me this idea of first and second and third order implications. And I think you've mentioned a few different types of tools like the scanning and the engagement, and considering the work that you're able to do and to be immersed in that future space. Just curious if there's a favorite part of foresight or a favorite tool of foresight or way of thinking, if there's one particular one that you just personally absolutely love.
I actively try not to have favorites so that I can continue to test and use other models as well. So I actually don't have any favorites. And I think depending on what we're working on and who we're working with and where they're at, we really do use a variety of different tools and approaches. So we don't really have a go-to. I think my advisor when I was at OCAD, Helen Kerr, who's amazing. And I remember she said, that you'll save yourself a lot of trouble in the long run if you create a set approach of doing things. So it's like off the box solution. And she said, and if you figure out how to do that, tell me how, because I've never been able to do that. And I'm exactly the same way. We never do anything the same way twice because people's questions about the future, what they're trying to sort out is always different. So we love future wheels. We use them all the time. We do horizon scanning for almost every project we do. We typically organize that using a steep V categorization. Sometimes we use other ones as well. And then even when it comes down to turning that information into scenarios, we actively try to use different scenario development methodologies every single time so that we're actually ourselves building capacity to test and play with different approaches, but also depending on the client, it really does require a different approach. There's times where a more archetype is really important to really push people to consider very different types of futures. And then there's moments where taking a bit more of a inductive method where you're saying, okay, here's a trend you're paying a lot of attention to. Okay, what could that mean? What's an extreme version of that in 20 years? All right, and then kind of more through a futures wheel or using like a Manoa method. I'm geeking out now too. So we like them all. I don't have any favorites. For a while there, I was very obsessed with the 3 horizon method tool. I literally found an application for it on every project. And then we started seeing limitations and I started understanding my own bias about it. So now I feel like we almost never use it.
Tell me the limitations of the 3 horizons. I'm so curious.
I
I
think
love it too, because Helen taught us 3 horizons, and I was like, it's perfect, just this way.
it's so good. I agree. It is so good. I have just found that going through the first horizon with people is amazing. You get so much. It's great. I love it. Getting to the third horizon and really getting people to describe where they want to go, the only time I found that to really push and be responsive is when you've added in a step where you're really asking them to contend with a bunch of emerging trends that really push them outside of their comfort zone, or else we find that what they will describe for that third horizon and where they hope to be in the future, for those who aren't familiar with the framework, doesn't feel far enough, doesn't feel aspirational enough, or not tangible enough. And then if you don't really lock that piece down, the second horizon where you talk about what needs to change to get there can still be a bit intangible or not quite getting where you need to then light a fire under everyone to act. So sometimes, again, you can add another step under that to turn it into action planning, especially right now with so many changes. We've been doing a lot more work where we actually build out different possible scenarios based on trends that people are really concerned about and or feel like they should be paying attention to, as well as we infuse ones that we think they're not paying enough attention to. Basically shifting their mental models about what's possible and then getting them to talk about where they want to be. And I feel like without taking people on that journey, sometimes you miss some opportunities and get a bit stuck. But again, it's really variable on the group. There's definitely groups out there that have already done that work, that are already paying attention to what this could look like and have a better ability and to do that. It's just, we found we're some groups who are a bit new to the area. It can be a bit tricky.
That's such good perspective. And it's true, this idea of visioning that would really need to happen and aspiration. Otherwise, you might just end up with the status quo for that final picture. And you've alluded to it a couple of times here, this idea of imagination. And you've mentioned before this idea of play. Prior to, you even mentioned anchoring into art or scanning art. And I hear it pop up here or there when you speak, this creativity, this playfulness, which I would love to unpack a little bit more, because knowing the public sector can be quite structured. So understanding how you add that secret ingredient, how do you encourage that playfulness, which would be so important when doing futures work in a way that also works in that kind of structured model.
For us, for people to really drop into a possible version of 2040 or 2050, to really immerse themselves in a scenario, we have found that you can't just read it to them. You can't just give them a story. For some people, that's enough. For some people, if you read a narrative, that's good. But for so many other people, for it to be real, for them to actually have a reaction, which is what you want a reaction to come deep from their gut of like, oh, yes, or oh, no. You need to incorporate other pieces. And so we definitely incorporate embodied futures whenever possible, where we actually do either role playing or performance. We also encourage the use or sometimes create actual artifacts, things that could exist in those futures that people can touch and look and feel and like experience at a different level to really understand what those different worlds might mean. And we've found the most effective way to get people to really understand how changes we're seeing today could emerge and result in different possible futures for them and what that could mean for their work is by putting them as far into that future as you can. And so we, in our practice and learning how to do this work, absolutely do experiential futures. So what we've been really playing with is how to make that happen in a bit more of a bite-sized experience. So it's still not too far out of the norm for some of the organizations we work with. They're not saying, what did you just invite me to? I thought this was a strategic planning workshop, but enough that it gets them there and has a lasting impact. And so we have found even just making sure that every scenario always has a persona that you can have people really understand what their experience is. And we recently did some work on the future of aging with the CSA group, a very extensive report on what Canada could look like in 2040 related to its aging population. And part of that work, we did scenarios and we wrote personas as an entryway in, thinking this is a nice element for some people, and they ended up wanting to really showcase it because they felt that was the best way to get policymakers to really understand the potential risk of not acting. And we've absolutely seen that in our work as well. There's something visceral about hearing about someone struggling or thriving in the possible future.
So I love that example. And I was wondering if there are any particular projects that stand out for you that you would be able to share that were particularly transformative, that really resonate for you, that really give you that feeling of like, yes, this is the journey, this is it. Is there anything that really stands out for you as a highlight that you would be willing to share with the listeners?
Oh my goodness, there's so many. Yeah, I was thinking about a project we did with a prairie-based theater community in 2022, I think, post-pandemic, where they were like, oh, how are we going to get back from where we were and all these changes? And oh my goodness, what is the future of prairie theater identity? And we worked with them to do scenarios that were not very optimistic. Like they were creative, and we ended up doing it in an improv way too, where we described the scenario and then you could interrogate and ask us questions about that world as though we were in them. It was so hard to do, but so amazing. The scenario development you had to have in the back of your mind was epic. But we watched everything from directors, theater company, to artists, to writers, to all these different elements come in feeling like, I don't know how we get out of this. This is hard. And the scenarios you described are hard, but I feel them, to, hey, wait, no, this is the future I want. And this is exactly the 5 things I need to get it. And we just saw this insane light bulb for all these artists who had come in feeling a bit like things were doom and gloom, to actually, I have something to say here and I have a role in this. This isn't just for the world around me to change. This is for me to do. So that was really transformative for us, as well as just watching that spark of hope that can really come from really leaning into the discomfort of some possible futures that might not be what we want. So I'd say that was really, really fantastic. I think more broadly, and we've written a bit about this on our website, but the work we did with the region of Waterloo for their strategic plan, where we came in and they said, we don't know, given our current policy environment, what our future is. So how do we plan in an environment where actual regional governments are impacted? And how do we understand the tremendous amount of growth we want while also maintaining all these other priorities? And how do we work together to advance these big, meaty challenges that aren't just for one department. And then we heard that from everywhere, that for them to actually work and innovate together, their structures limited that. And so we worked with them to, again, go through different possible futures. That was amazing. We worked with youth to describe different futures of 2050 in the region and what that would look like. And then we took those scenarios to a bunch of different groups to get them to react and talk about what needed to change to get where we want to. So that was really great. But then the actual product that came out of it was a very integrated strategy that wasn't broken down. It had 4 priority areas, and each priority area was for everybody. And there was a very clear shared role. And that if you didn't understand your shared role, regardless of your department, then you needed to look at that and think, wait a second. This is what we need to do, and how do we work that? And I think just taking a more integrative approach then has invited them to take a more innovative and collaborative approach to how they plan and work together across departments in a better way. So that was amazing. That was definitely such a great experience, and really excited about where it came at the end.
I read the council minutes for that presentation. And I think one of my favorite comments that had come from that was, I'm not sure who said it, but someone was like, who actually said they wanted these futures or something like that? And you were like, well, actually, we did consult with the youth, and there were a number of individuals who have inputted into this and have expressed a desire for this, which is just a wonderful moment to be able to say, when there's that doubt, no, actually, this is founded on something, that aspiration, that passion that exists within the community. That actually leads to this thought around community engagement and the importance of community engagement that you have built into your processes. How do you ensure that everyone is coming to the table, or you're consulting with the right individuals, or in that situation, for example, of engaging with youth? I find that that can be a very challenging group to target, just even from a privacy and connection and consent perspective of being able to speak to the younger generation. I'm curious how you navigate that to ensure that there is appropriate representation.
With the work that we do, the first phase of work is almost in many ways the most challenging and complicated. And that is when we do engagement planning and planning for the rest of it. But so much of that is figuring out, okay, who have you heard from? Who do you actually already know what they think? What information do you already have related to that? And I think in this case, they just done a resident survey. So we had pretty good data around a specific portion of the population who responded to those surveys. And so we knew what they wanted, and it was very clear in the data. We also knew from some of the other strategy development work they had done, other communities that were starting to get brought into the fold a bit more, and some of their perspectives too. So we had a pretty good assessment of what have people already been asked in the last few years, and who is missing from this. And then from the who's missing from this, we worked with a variety of folks within the region, but also community partners, to figure out how we could incorporate their perspectives. Some of that was the decision to bring youth into the mix, to actually explore the scenarios, but then also use the scenarios to also say, what do we need to focus on? And the youth outreach piece took some time. They had a youth cabinet, but it had kind of shifted with some changes. I think some high school students have gone on to post-secondary, and so they were recruiting, and so we put it together. But it did mean that we ended up getting youth from every part of the region, and we encouraged them to all bring a friend. So everyone had someone with them. So that was helpful for them to contribute. And then in some other cases, we worked with a few different partners to try to design and schedule for the most appropriate time. But we knew that still for the workshops, they were 3 hours. Not everyone can do that. So to kind of round that out, the city's engagement team took some of the questions we had, and they took them around to different community events. And we just did our best. And in the result, we did engage extensively, but it wasn't perfect. Lots of room for improvement. But I think it's about really trying to target where there's gaps in knowledge, and then figuring out the best way to reach those people. The workshops would have been completely different if we had decided to focus on a different audience as well. Deciding we were going to really work deeply with youth meant that we gamified the whole thing. It was a completely different workshop than we would have done maybe if it was just building the scenarios with council.
I think that's an excellent example of what you were saying earlier of how every single engagement ends up being unique, or every single project ends up being unique, because I think there could be broad brush strokes that individuals could apply to futures thinking. So some questions that I've gotten in the past is, you have a podcast on foresight. How much can you actually talk about foresight? But then when you actually peek under the cover, there's so many different ways it shakes out. There's similar tools and there's similar values, perhaps, or principles of engagement or co-creation or that hope for the future. But at the root of it, it's true, every single project could be so different. So I wonder what's on the horizon for yourself for Creative Futures, any emerging topics or challenges that you're excited to tackle? What does the future of Creative Futures look like?
Great question, and something we think about all the time. We really grappled early on because futures work is so sprawling across so many different domains. And because Heather and I are both generalists, we really struggled early on with the notion that we would have focus areas or whatnot. But in the end, it just kind of emerged. And so we're really deep into looking at the futures of cities, futures of work, futures of health and well-being, as well as futures of art and creativity. And those are definitely four spaces that connect, but also really motivate us individually and personally. I think something that I've really been reflecting on when it comes to the future of cities and really the future of all of these items, one of the biggest challenges facing us is around the future of housing. And I think that this is not a surprise to anyone. Everyone knows we're in a housing crisis. Everyone knows that the solutions are slow and not enough. We know that young people are now come to terms with the fact that they don't think they'll ever own. And we know that the actual building of housing stock is not keeping up with the tremendous population growth we have had in recent years. But I think that despite knowing all of this, there's a little bit of everyone pointing the finger in a different direction of like, well, it's for this person to fix, or it's for this person. Oh, it's the developer's fault. Oh, it's the government's fault. Oh, it's somebody else's fault. And I think that one place that foresight could really help is we really need to better explore and lean into the potentially uncomfortable futures of where we could be headed if we keep on this trajectory. And I feel like to really motivate a collective action around this immense challenge that isn't one person's to fix, it's for everybody to fix. I do feel like there's work in the future space to better help people understand implications and how some of this could play out. So this is an area that I'm really motivated. I went to a conference the end of last year, and the chief economist from RBC said, if we don't fix Canada's housing crisis, nothing else related to our economy matters because it's impacting everything. And I just fully believe that's something that all of us should work together to help move the needle in some way. So that's definitely an area. And then from like a programmatic standpoint, because people are really facing challenges with budgets right now, we've been trying to look at how we can create a bit more bite-sized offerings. One area that we've been really expanding and are excited to really do more of this year is actually retreats, team retreats, leadership retreats. As I mentioned earlier, helping people take that pause from all of the critical issues that they're up over their head with, to take a moment and look outward and to pause and to use that information to be more confident with the decisions you're making today, energize teams, hopefully create a bit more balance in people's step about what they're doing and why they're doing. So that's definitely an area we're excited to do more of this year.
That is really exciting and it's so important. And I think that this question tends to come up a lot when discussing futures work. And it's never one that I plan on asking in advance, but it always just inevitably happens because when we talk about the future, at a moment like this, when there is so much uncertain, as you've mentioned, and when things can look kind of bleak, how do you balance that? What would your advice be to individuals that are just like, oh man, we are really not doing well and we're resigned to never owning a house, and that Canadian dream, where has it gone? How do you personally navigate it? How do you coach clients through this? Any words of wisdom or advice?
Yeah, this is a question I get asked a lot, actually. I think I was asked it yesterday morning at school drop off by other parents of how do you still seem so light and optimistic about the world, given how much you read about and understand the possibilities of where else things could be headed. And it's funny, we actually asked the same question of Wendy Schultz back in 2018 when I was working with her, getting her advice on a project I was doing at the time on the future of work. And she said something that I will forever remind myself of, which is that when you think about possible futures and take the worst case scenario of what you might think about, you have to remember that there's also other possible futures, and that at the end of the day, there's incremental change and there's rapid change. And often the incremental change can be impacted if you can get in front of it. And so really understand where those opportunities are and focus on that, not the crippling doom and gloom. Oh my gosh, how am I going to get outside of bed? But it still happens to me. I've definitely read a stat last year about how the trees last year or in 2023 did not absorb any carbon. So the trees gave up.
Oh, I haven't read that one. That sounds terribly sad.
I was devastated for at least a week. Like, I was just like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And it was because it was the hottest year in records, that because of all the forest fires, they just weren't able to keep up with the carbon put into the atmosphere. And it's happened before. It's not the first time. So remembering, looking at history, it's happened, they recovered. Happening one year doesn't mean it'll happen every year, but it does mean that a lot of the climate projections are a little bit off because that one year trees didn't do their job because they couldn't. But it's just humbling, right? All of us get there. It's like we have bad years and we can't do what we were supposed to do, so we didn't. And we'll see what happens. So I remain an optimist because I have to.
Well, that's a heavy school drop off to be dropping your kid off and to be asked that heavy question. That's a parent facing some existential crisis there and going, Jessica, what can I do? I think as tragic, it's true as the tree stat is, which I did not know that. I think that is a good pearl of wisdom that you share, that sometimes there are days when you just can't do what you need to do. And the next year will be better, hopefully. And I think that there is so much inspiration to take with the work that you're actively doing in the space to help organizations find better outcomes. It's the incremental work, it's the individuals that you interact with. And there must be some boon there in terms of your optimism because you're able to say that you are truly contributing towards more positive futures, your day-to-day work, which is wonderful.
I'm trying, definitely. But yes, I think there's many changes that are happening right now south of the border, in the broader environment, across the oceans, everywhere in our next door, like everywhere, that if we're to focus on the negative possibilities, it is very challenging to function in basic daily life. But we have to remember at the end of the day that there's a range of possible futures, and the worst case is one, and we should understand that. But there's also a whole other range. There's a rainbow of other possibilities. And I think we just all need to remember that and try to figure out how we get to the other colors of the rainbow, not maybe the ones that are a little bit gray and gloomy.
I love that analogy, the rainbow of possibilities. Well, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you might want to cover off? Anything you might want to share with listeners before we sign off?
Yeah. Again, anyone who's listening and is curious about futures, dive in. I think everyone should be future curious and remember that there's so many different possibilities, but hopefully in many of those possibilities, we're all able to become futurists and navigate the changes as they come. And thank you so much for inviting me. This was great.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for joining us. Honestly, it's been such a pleasure. And your perspective is so unique in terms of all the different sectors that you cover and that systems change that you're able to create. So it seems the journey led you back to that initial passion, which is wonderful. I love to see that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning into this conversation with Jessica Thornton of Creative Futures, where we explored what it means to navigate uncertainty and imagine bold futures. In this episode, Jessica shared how her work at Creative Futures is helping organizations build confidence in a rapidly changing world, reminding us that futures thinking is not just for futurists, but for everyone. Whether it's about creating safe spaces to explore possibilities or finding practical ways to incorporate foresight into everyday decisions, Jessica's insights are a reminder that we all have a role to play in shaping what's next. If you found value in today's episode, please do share it with your network and leave us a review. It helps us reach more listeners like you. Don't forget to subscribe to Futures Hub for more conversations with changemakers in the foresight space. And if there's aspects of this episode that you really want to dive more into, feel free to visit the show notes on futureshub.ca. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Until then, stay curious and keep building better futures.